we found that the more we were having spiritual intimacy and connecting and communicating, and then following that up with sexual intimacy, which is like our hearts becoming one, then our bodies doing that very thing that our hearts just did, it was like a story of goodness was coming full circle.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Can you relate? You probably came from a good home and a loving family. Your parents were affectionate towards each other, and maybe you could tell that they actually really liked each other too. You may have been active in your church. Growing up, though, conversations about sex were mostly about biological reproduction or God's word on chastity. Perhaps those conversations served you well as a teenager, but after you're married, you were left with a lot of questions and maybe even painful experiences as the realities of sex and marriage didn't fit with what you thought it would be. Which is why this podcast even exists in the first place, right? For me personally, I used to think sexuality and spirituality were incompatible. However, after digging into our own Christian theology, I came to understand that it supports embodiment, sensuality, and sexuality in a very positive way. Sometimes our culture doesn't match up with our theology. I look around and I see a God who is powerful, creative, passionate, and very personal. Of all the religions, I think ours ought to be the most sex positive. Even if you're not a Christian, there's no denying that some of the most meaningful experiences we can have is being loved and desired deeply by another person and experiencing a special kind of pleasure. And this experience is spiritual and transcendent. My guest today is Francie Winslow, a friend and a fellow podcaster. Her podcast is titled Heaven in Your Home, and it's one I listen to. I've invited her on this podcast to tell her story of healing and growing sexually. I love her story because she talks about her realization about how frequency of sexual experiences didn't automatically translate to quality of sexual experiences. You'll also get to hear Francie's healing experience accepting her own sensual side and how she connected to the deeper meaning of her sensuality to God's design for her. You'll hear her excellent advice on creating margin in your lifestyle so you have time and energy left over to invest in your marriage relationship. You'll also get to hear her black belt sex tip at the end, which is awesome. My wife Emily and I have tried it out since the time we recorded this episode with Francie, and we had such a great time doing it. We're definitely going to make it a regular part of what we do. I appreciate you leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts. I recently updated the artwork for the podcast to a photo of Emily and me, and some of you noticed, like this reviewer. She says, "This podcast is so helpful, and I love the podcast picture update. This podcast has such helpful insights. Thank you for your review. If your review is read out loud on this podcast, email support@getyourmarriageon.com and I'll send you a gift. The place to leave your review is on the Apple Podcasts app. Your reviews help this podcast grow. I've also started a new YouTube channel. I'll be posting product reviews, black belt sex tips, ideas for strengthening your relationship, creative and fun date ideas, and much more. Please be sure to head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel there. The link is in the show notes. You can also follow us on Instagram for daily marriage inspiration too. Now, let's go meet Francie. Francie, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. How are you today?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me, Dan. It's so fun to be here with you.
Now, you are so interesting. How many countries have you traveled to or lived in?
Oh, man. I've only, other than the U.S., lived in one country, but I've traveled to a lot. I haven't sat to count them lately, but some
Tens?
Asia,
20s?
South America, Africa. Yeah.
Been everywhere.
It's been an adventure.
So if you lived in another country, what one was it?
My husband and I lived in Sri Lanka our first year of marriage. It's a
First
little
year.
tiny island off of the coast of India.
That is so crazy. Tell me about your first year of marriage. What was that like?
Well, it was a little bit interesting. I was really involved in missions as a high schooler. Loved being just a part of what God was doing all over the world. I was fascinated by travel and seeing God in unlikely places. I was raised kind of just in a really wholesome conservative home in the South. And when I got to travel and see God at work in the poorest of the poor places, in slums, in African villages, it just blew my mind. And I knew, like, I want to live for something different than just myself and just kind of accumulating wealth. And so that led me to the year after I graduated high school. I did a gap year and I worked for a missions organization and got to travel, spent some time in a brothel with girls my own age.
That's so cool.
God's love
What was that like? Were you like living there or just?
No, that was a short, I was based in Texas, but that was a short-term trip that we were partnering with a local ministry, and we just came alongside of them and supported what they were doing, just honestly going into bars literally in Chiang Mai and sitting with the girls who would be bought that night. And we bought a couple of them, said, hey, can we take you out for the night? And we gave them pedicures and fed them dinner and just told them about their value and their true beauty and that God loves them. And we're connecting them to the ministry that was giving them space to get out of the trade and be trained with real skills. And so it was deeply moving to me. It definitely marked me for life. Forever, I was changed from that. I worked in Mother Teresa's home for the dying in India. So I had all these experiences that just absolutely turned my world upside down. And then I went to college a year after that and met my husband. And I was so focused. I'm like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to be doing something. I could imagine myself single, honestly, for a really long time because I just had so many things on my bucket list. And I met him and I immediately called my accountability partner at that time. I said, pray for me. There's this really cute guy. And I didn't think he was in my league because at that time he was actually a young pastor in our church. And I was just thinking, wow, he's really amazing. Whoever marries him is going to be really lucky. And within less than a year, we were married. So kind of shocking that it happened that fast. But we got to know each other for about 6 months. And then we dated, engaged, and were married in 6 months. So wouldn't recommend that to everyone. But it worked for us. And I'm actually glad. So I was 20 when we got married. And then that was the same year that the tsunami happened in Southeast Asia that wiped out so much of Thailand and southern India. And so our church that we were part of had a humanitarian aid arm and that was going to do immediate relief. And then when they moved into the development phase of helping restore the villages beyond just rice and bandages, they asked us if we would come help manage the project. So we had been married for just a few months, and they were like, you want some one-way tickets to Sri Lanka and go have an adventure of a lifetime? We're like, yes. So I quit college. I just said, I'm leaving. I don't know when I'll be back. I was at Wheaton College, so I don't know if that means anything to you, but it was a little bit out of the box for what this small Christian school usually has happened. And I got married and then was like, I'll see you when I see you. So we moved to Sri Lanka with one-way tickets, and yeah, it was a lot to process within a year for a little 21-year-old girl, but it was amazing.
That is so amazing. So I know a little bit about you. You and your husband are in Sri Lanka, and it's not easy. You're adjusting to married life. You're in a totally different country. It's really stressful and kind of traumatic what you're exposed to every day. So you're bringing all this home, and then you feel disconnect. So you're sitting on the couch having these conversations. Can you tell us about how those went? And what happened?
You mean our pink couch conversations?
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, we came home and we were realizing we don't really know each other. We've had, lots of moments to feel disconnected, to feel the hard of newlywed life. And we talked to some pastors and they're like, we think you just really need some inner healing. And so that really was a big part of the first season of our marriage also, was realizing, wow, it's so easy to miss each other. And it's so easy to say words or to not say words, and the other feels shut down. And so what we did in that time was we really prioritized what we now call time on our pink inner healing couch. It was a pink couch. It was what we had at the time. And we just sat there and we'd say, well, I'm really shut down. Okay, well, what happened? I don't know. When did you last feel alive? Like what happened in between that point and now, because you went somewhere. And so we just learned to talk through that and invite God into that and say, God, what lies have I believed that I have fallen into this pit again, or the shame that I'm carrying around, or just repented to each other for ways that we've used our words unwisely. And it was just a sweet time of bringing our spirits together and opening our hearts together. And then what we felt compelled to do was then to go to the bedroom and bring our bodies together. And so that really marked a ton of our first year of marriage. Given that time and given a season in Sri Lanka, we ended up having sex almost every day for the first year of our marriage, not because we were doing some intense challenge. It just was what we were following our hearts on this journey of wanting to be one and wanting to feel connected to each other. And so both of us came from really beautiful but very religious backgrounds that helped us in so many ways, but we didn't really have a grid for what to think of this idea of married sex, but we knew we wanted to be close to each other and that life was really hard and intense. And so we found that having sex was actually way more than the marriage books that we were reading was talking about. It was kind of like a man's need, and it's really a thing you should do to have a healthy marriage. We found that the more we were having spiritual intimacy and connecting and communicating, and then following that up with sexual intimacy, which is like our hearts becoming one, then our bodies doing that very thing that our hearts just did. It was like a story of goodness was coming full circle. It was like God was coming close to us and saying, this is my design. This is what I've created. This is like a little slice of heaven on earth. And so we began to say, this feels like a thin place, which is like an old Celtic phrase of when heaven and earth are so closely overlapping that you feel the sensation of shalom. And it's like something really sweet is happening. And so we just kept going with that desire to be open in our hearts and communicating, and desire to be open with our bodies and being one, and started our journey that way. So it was definitely a really adventurous season, a lot of rocky moments, but we learned in that season the power of leaning in when it's easier to lean out. And we've kind of kept practicing that really simple idea. When it's easier to lean out, that's when you got to lean in.
That's so good. I think so many couples live in the disconnect for a long time for various reasons, but you two really pushed yourselves. No, we got to grow up around this. Let's figure this out. And you had a really beautiful ritual of how you would work through that. So way to go. What a great way to start your first year. Now, you were in the ministry as a teen and then marriage. So I would assume that that transition into sex in marriage was a little bit difficult. Yet you managed to have sex almost every day for a year in your first year of marriage. How was that transition for you? Or any fun hiccups or stories or difficulties that you recognize that you ran into?
Yeah, well, I think I had a couple narratives in my mind. I think I was reading marriage books and I really wanted to be a good wife. He wanted to be a good husband. We wanted to have a good marriage. So we were really trying to find, like, what is the deal with this? And it was interesting. I mean, you'd find some books that were about marriage and they literally didn't mention sex one time in the marriage book. And you're like, oh, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Or, others that slanted more along, this is a man's need and a woman's need is emotions. And so we were just trying to make sense of that bias. And I think what we know now is that
book was written by a man, by the way.
An old paradigm. Yeah.
An old man.
Yeah. And honestly, and realizing, okay, so I think I did start with the belief that I want to be a good wife, so I should say yes to a lot of sex. That's completely honest. That was where I started.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the worst place to start, I have to say. Like, I read some books on some women who were like, be a generous wife, be a yes wife. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try that. The truth is I had a lot of pain. I was on birth control pill at that point, and I didn't realize the moral implications for that personally. And so we ended up working through that. And because we worked through that, I got off the pill. Then I realized I'm in a lot less pain. So that was a difficult thing to walk through, is I was actually experiencing pain and then trying to be a good wife. And that was a bit of a hiccup that we had to work through of like, is it worth it? He feels bad that I'm having pain. That did cause us to have conversations that were uncomfortable that helped push us towards more vulnerability. I was grateful that it was only a few months that I was on the pill, and then we got off of it and I realized, oh, that's interesting. So that was a little bit of a hiccup the first year, but I think the biggest hiccup actually lasted like 10 or 15 years was the reality that I was just really disconnected from my body. And my body was going through the motions, but I wasn't necessarily fully engaged with the pleasure or fully engaged with my feminine design or fully engaged with holy sensuality. It was like I was saying yes, and we were growing and we were having a good marriage. And the trajectory for me was that we were having sweet times together after sex, and we felt really connected after sex. And during sex was really good, but it was still more of the this is something we do to stay connected, and then we feel emotional connection, and I would really enjoy that. It wasn't until a couple years ago where I really started getting free in my own femininity and sensuality and pleasure focus. And I think because of the upbringing and the culture that we were all raised in, it was more appropriate to just disconnect from my femininity and my body, even as somebody who had been in ministry and studying theology of the body and studying things that were making sense of the Bible and sexuality. I was still disconnected from what it looks like to be fully alive sexually. And so that's been my most recent journey. I've been on this journey all the time, the whole time. We've been married almost 19 years this summer, but it's continued to be a place of growth. And I will say it's been worth it. Like, it's been a beautiful season of marriage where we've just continued to lean into each other, and it's all been growth. But I think the beautiful thing about walking with God in your sexuality is that he continues to do healing works that you thought, oh, I thought I was healed. Oh, there's more. Oh, there's more. Oh, there's more. So that's kind of been the journey.
I think God's grand design for all of us is far greater than we can imagine ourselves. So, of course, once you think you've mastered one thing, there's going to be more for you to grow and climb into, because that's the glory that he can offer us. Mm-hmm. I find this really instructive, by the way, Francie, because you can have a lot of frequency of sex. You can go through the motions, yet you didn't realize at that time until now, looking back, that even though our bodies are together, I am disconnected from my own experience or from my own body or from the pleasure I can have. And we live in a very, I guess, we're in the United States. We have a very Western approach to sex. Our sex education we get is usually around reproduction. That's kind of how the birds and the bees story starts for us, which is a very male-centric narrative, right? It's about penises and vaginas. And that's kind of how we think of sex when we start. As you're stepping into your femininity, have you realized that sometimes it's helpful to flip that narrative on its head and think of it more as a female-centric narrative? And what would that look like?
Yeah, so I've felt like the old models that I read in the sex books, even like Christian or non-Christian, just honestly men were writing these sex models, was that a certain amount of stimulation makes a woman aroused and then makes her have an orgasm, and that is the process. And we tried that forever. And to some degree, it does work, to some degree. But there was still so much pressure, and there was still so much sense of like, it's a lot of work. And what if I take too long? Or what if he loses interest? Or what if I'm exhausted and I don't have energy for that? And it feels like a show, and it feels like something to achieve, and it feels like something to perform. And all of that is actually very masculine-ness.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It's not a sense of receptivity. And I think when I started realizing, and this brings the Christian worldview into it, is that I'm an image bearer of God, and there's significance to how I'm made. It's not that sex needs to look like a certain way to be successful. It's how has God designed me? And so rather than looking at the gift or the activity and trying to match what other people are saying, I stepped back and looked at, okay, he's a good maker. How did he make me female uniquely? And what I started realizing about the female body is that it is capable of endless pleasure, of incredible multiple orgasms over and over and over again, ecstatic, like electric sensations head to toe in your very non-sexual areas of your body, the soles of your feet, the back of your neck, like anywhere, the sides of your stomach, like all over your body is meant to be, your earlobes, right, you name it, full body pleasure. And that, I think, was God's garden dream. In the beginning, he created this most beautiful pinnacle of creation, the woman, who was the final exclamation point of beauty. And not only does she have a clitoris that has, no other function other than pleasure. We used to think it had 8,000 nerve endings until they actually studied a human clitoris last year. I don't know if you knew this, but all the studies previously were based on a cow's clitoris because they hadn't even the scientific community had not looked at an actual woman's body. A woman's clitoris actually has more than 10,000 nerve endings. And a man's penis, which is the, anatomical similarity to a woman, right, has 4,000. And so a woman has double the capacity, more than double the capacity of pleasure. But I was never taught that fact. And I was also never taught how to access that and how to embody that in a natural way, not in a really kind of icky, seductive way that I see in movies. Because as a Christian woman, I was raised to resist impurity. And I wanted to, I want to be pure before God. I want to live a holy life unto God. I want to be in the light. And everything that seemed seductive and sensuous seemed like it was in the dark. And so I thought, I'm not going to be that. I can't be that. And so then even the thought of come alive in the bedroom felt like I can't do that. So it's all of these psychological off limits, but then it was also having no body education. How does my body work? No permission to explore my body or understand how it works. And then you add the pressure of, he wants me to have an orgasm so he feels successful. So I think it was all of those layers have been what I've been working through the last 5 years and what my amazing sweet husband has been like dying to walk with me through it. Like he has set the table for me with his purity, with his pursuit of my heart, with his pursuit of growth in his own life, so that this has become an easy walk for me over the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. He's taken away every barrier he can with his training of his own eyes for purity, his training of his words to bless me, to encourage me, to make space for me. And then I had to do the work of getting in touch with my own body. And so I think it is flipping the switch of flipping the narrative that it's not about like a woman needs to be stimulated in this way to feel aroused and have sex so that she can be penetrated and he ejaculates. It is about how can a woman receive maximum pleasure, honestly, all day?
Yes.
How can she be aware of her senses all day? How can she be in tune with her body all day? How can I be connected to my body all day so by the time it comes a moment of sexual expression with my husband, I am overflowing with aliveness because I'm connected to my female design. It's not just I had to flip a switch. I used to think it was, okay, I gotta go in my bathroom and like try really hard to get in the mood and put on some makeup or take a shower and pray. And I've said that, like pray, ask God for energy. But I've since realized a better way, and it's living connected to my feminine beauty all day in sensual ways that don't involve high heels and glitter, but involve me being genuinely connected to my beautiful female body as a mother of 6 who's tired, who has 4 kids home from school this week sick. It's the middle of real life. How can I continue to connect to my feminine design? So I guess I'm saying that it's not some lofty ideal way out in a special book. It is in the grind of daily life, being a woman fully alive, flourishing in her feminine sexuality in a way that nourishes her body, spirit and soul, and her marriage. So I think it is definitely a narrative switch that has helped me heal the most in the last 5 years or so.
I'm loving this conversation because this is our experience also in my marriage.
Really?
Yes. So I was coaching another couple recently, and she's having a really difficult time. They're a wonderful couple, and they've come a long way, but she's having a hard time reconciling her erotic nature with her spiritual nature. Kind of like what you said.
Yeah.
In the beginning, they seemed really incompatible. Any advice for women and men? I've been there too. How to kind of see those two kind of blend together? Because like what you said, like the movies or other media, it's kind of has this like, wait, I don't want to identify with kind of being like that. Yet there's an aspect within all of us to some degree or another where stepping into that identity actually helps us bring out the erotic part of us, which helps with that sexual connection.
Yeah. So what helped me, and I'll just say my story, is understanding, and this might just show how much of a nerd I am. I am like, why are we like this? When did this begin? Historically speaking, theologically speaking, understanding that from the beginning of Christian history in the first century, there was the lie called Gnosticism. And it's the idea of dualism, that our bodies are bad and spirits are good.
Which was influenced by the Greeks. It wasn't a Christian idea. It's a Hellenistic idea.
Yeah, and it was present all the way through our early theology, and it helped form our understanding of what the flesh means and denying the flesh, and we get really confused in all of that, and we begin to feel afraid of our bodies rather than seeing them as a gift from God.
When you read a Bible verse says, about the flesh, what's your new understanding now of what that means?
Gosh, I don't think about that articulating that very much because I'm thinking about how good and beautiful my body is as a temple of the living God. But what is your thought when you think of the flesh? I mean, it's obviously like appetites that lead you away from God. Or tell me what's on your mind.
I've come to learn from me, it's about the ego. It's when I let my ego, is another way of saying it, or my own self-deception kind of rule. It's not about body urges. That's not wrong or evil, right? Like, because I hunger, I eat. That's fantastic. I'm glad I have that. If I didn't, I'd die. Or it's not about that. It's when I let my ego or like when you and your husband were disconnected on the couch, like living in that disconnection and kind of taking pride. It's pride. That is when we yield to the flesh. That's my new understanding. And when I read it in that context, it makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing, Bible translations and language and cultures. And I love that. And so having to understand that my body is good and my spirit is good, and they're one package that God has made, and specifically my female body is good. And I think it's all tricky in the modesty culture too. Like, okay, I cover it up. We're talking about this with our teenagers. They're in a lovely conservative community, and there's modesty rules. And the implicit nature, though, is that if I have to cover my shoulders, it must be because they're bad. That's the language or the assumption that we automatically make, is that there's shame attached to something because there's rules around it, because it's dangerous. And so having to unlearn that my body's not dangerous, my body's not bad, my body is good and beautiful. And then realizing that one of my big barriers was exhaustion. And so I think you mentioned that this person you're talking to was experiencing pleasure and goodness, maybe on vacation sex, but harder to integrate that into their everyday life. And I think that for me, realizing that there is so much noise coming at me through my phone, through media, through everything, that my senses are actually deadened by distraction and exhaustion. And that go, get it done, here's my list, check it off, meet everybody's needs, is actually a very masculine posture to keep in my everyday life. And when that is my mode, when I'm constantly on the go, constantly doing, constantly in traffic, I'm tense and I'm distracted and I'm thinking about a million things at one time, and I'm fully numb to my body and any sensation as I'm going throughout my day. And so I realized that that's actually quite a masculine way of operating. And then all of a sudden I have to flip a switch and become feminine in bed or become sensual. That feels so unnatural. So what I've tried to do is start thinking about, how can I incorporate a feminine sense of being in my own body, in my own day, as a busy mom of 6 with some special needs kids, with some really difficult things we're walking through as a family. It's not that, I'm on like vacation all the time in Hawaii and able to do this. It's no, I'm in traffic, but I'm thinking about where I'm holding tension in my body. And I'm thinking about belly breathing down way into my pelvic floor and feeling that and thanking God for that sensation. And I'm thinking about at night when I have a few practices that I've picked up where I move my body in a nonlinear way so that I can just stretch and feel the tension and move through it and pay attention to my body and where it feels tight. And then I can take some lotion and just give myself a hand massage or a neck massage or a foot massage. And it's not kinky or weird. It's getting in my body as a female and living from this posture of softness and receptivity and tenderness throughout the day, because realizing that arousal doesn't necessarily come from stimulation. It comes from awareness, and awareness comes from rest. And so I'm doing all these little micro adjustments throughout my day where I like make a cup of tea and I'll actually smell the tea and feel the warmth of the cup. All of these things are sensual. So the Christian woman who is like, I don't want to be weird and sensual and kinky and like wear sparkly red high heels, that's not what being sensual is. It's being aware and awake to your senses and your receptivity as a woman, that you're designed to receive beauty and pleasure and give off beauty and pleasure. And this cycle of receiving and giving and creating beauty and pleasure all the time, that is the Garden of Eden dream, I believe, for women. And we live disconnected from that when we're so stressed out, distracted, overwhelmed, and then we're numb to our senses and our sensuality. And then it's hard to achieve, I put that in quotes, orgasm, because it's something on our to-do list. It's something we do for someone else. It's something, rather than being so connected to our bodies that we feel arousal because we're aware of our bodies, we bless it. And then we're able to express that when we come together with our husbands, if that makes sense. So that's part of been my way of thinking differently as a busy, tired mom. How can I be as most in my body all day? Maybe it's taking a walk without my phone and breathing. Maybe it's having some time just laying flat on my bed with no input and just putting my hands on my body and just being and remembering sensual times. All of those little things help me become more awake and aware so that we can have what resembles vacation sex when we're not on vacation, but it's at home because I'm including my body and my experience in everyday moments that build up a sense of anticipation and awareness so that we can have genuine sexual excitement in our everyday life and not just when we're on vacation.
I love that. That's so good. I also like how you mentioned we're just so distracted and bombarded, but some of it's our lifestyle that we're choosing. There's some lifestyle changes we can make too. Maybe it's a little less distraction, a little less noise.
Yeah, there's a trick on the phone that I've taught my kids, and they'll often be like, Mom, it's hard for me to grocery shop on my phone when this happens, but you hit the side button on the iPhone 3 times and it goes black and white, and it's so much easier to not get distracted when your phone is black and white. But when it's colorful, it's designed to distract you. It's designed to pull you in and bombard you. But so I have to undo it sometimes when I'm grocery shopping because I can't identify the objects as easily. But doing little things like that. We have a tech box in our kitchen where we put our phones, just things to consciously reduce the addiction, I have it, to constantly being on our phones. And ultimately that numbs me from what's happening in my heart. What grief am I holding? What sadness am I holding that I need to process? Or what might I be able to do that renews my feminine sense of well-being in this moment so that I can connect to my own journey and my heart and my body and be excited for later when I get to be with my husband. So yeah, definitely seeing it as for what it is. It's a device and a tool, but it also can be a huge place of numbing that doesn't serve me well.
That's good. We have the same box in our kitchen too. We call it jail, phone jail.
Oh, I love that. Put the phone in the jail.
Yep.
That humor.
You talked earlier about how your husband helped kind of prepare the table for you, metaphorically speaking, to help you step into your femininity. Let's talk to husbands for a second. What are some things that men can do to improve the climate of sensuality, sexuality, connection, closeness, like we've been talking about?
Well, it is such a big deal. I think I always go back to the garden because I'm always like, Lord, how did we get here? And what is your design? And as simple as we can put it, we've kind of decided in our own mind's eye that men have strength to serve. And that means laying themselves down, right? And serving with their abilities. Serving, that also means training and practicing. And one of the sweetest things that my husband did in our marriage vows was he said, my eyes are only for you. And that has been a game changer for me because I have seen men throughout my life and I've watched their eyes, whether they're on their phone or, it's not easy. It's not hard to look over at somebody's phone and see what they're looking at. Or just watching the women who walk by and checking them out head to toe. Wyatt has trained his eyes to behold my beauty. And that has won so much trust for me so that when we're together, I feel safe being with him as I am. And so if you're a man listening, I just want to affirm the power of your strength and the power of your gaze. And speaking of technology and speaking of devices and distraction, we can behold so many images that are not real and that are not realistic that we get numb to the beauty that's in front of us. And so it's kind of like if you see doctored up and edited pictures of exotic forest and beautiful scenes of nature on your phone all the time, you go outside and you miss the beautiful rose that's right at your front steps. Even though it's there, it's not as doctored up as maybe the edited photos on National Geographic, but it's there and it's actually stunning. And it's right there in front of you that you can taste it, feel it, touch it, smell it. I think that's how it is sometimes in our marriage is that I have watched Wyatt train his eyes. I know that I don't look like a swimsuit model. I've had 6 kids, but he genuinely sees my beauty. And he's talked to me about how his masculine soul has been so healed during the process of our sexual growth. But part of it has been this capacity, to see my beauty as I age, to see my beauty. And he has said it in a way and lived it in a way that I actually believe him. And that has allowed me to walk in so much more freedom and confidence as I am, as I'm walking through the lies that I've believed. I actually believe him when he calls me beautiful. He's also trained his words where he never says a demeaning word to me. And that has been a profound place of healing. He blesses my body. He's blessed me to bless my body. He's blessed me to enjoy my body. His words that constantly build me up have helped me believe. I'll just say even in our first year of marriage, I came to him with this insecurity. I said, I don't believe my body's beautiful. When you tell me that, I kind of joke and I laugh it off. Can you actually tell me what you believe, what you see as beautiful? And so every night he would just say, I think your toes are so cute. I think this part of your legs are beautiful. And he'd go head to toe, just like the guy in Song of Solomon did, head to toe declaring her beauty. And he did it over and over and over again. And I began to believe him. And so
good for you to believe it.
It's been a beautiful journey. And, times change and we're growing older. And so one of the other things that's really helped us is we will say, my heart needs to hear this because he can't read my mind. Now, I'm almost 40. I've had 6 kids. And so I'll come to him with new needs and I'll say, my heart needs to hear this. And I'll just give him the phrase that I need affirmation. And he's done the same thing with me. Hey, I am struggling here. I need you to affirm me in this. And so we've had to accept that we can't read each other's minds and also to believe that our words are powerful over each other. So I think those 2 things have been game changers for him, for me in terms of how he's interacted with me and how he has invited me continually. And he's been very patient with me. He's always been the one to buy sex books and I've always been the one to be slow. So if you're eager and your wife is slow, just know that there are layers to her journey and your patient self-giving love paves the way to her to find freedom. And I'll say, because he was so patient, it's taken us 18 years to get where we are, and probably massive, massive quick growth in the last 3 years. But a lot of it has been because of his faithfulness, because of his pursuit of me, and time I needed to heal. I needed to heal the lies that were so deeply sown into my heart and my body. And we're in a really sweet place of a lot of suffering, honestly, in our home, and a lot of pleasure. So it's like this beauty of pain and pleasure, and it actually makes it even more meaningful because there's healing in our sexual union. There's a space of trauma release. There's a space of oneness. There's a space of, we are going through the fire and we're going to get through it together. And so there's so many beautiful levels to the gift of sexuality. And I think that makes sense why there's such a battle for it. But it's worth leaning in. It's worth fighting for each other. It's worth doing the work in our hearts and expressing the love through our actions, because it's holy ground.
That's great. I've loved our conversation, Francie. This has been fantastic. Now,
Thanks
let's
for having
say
me.
you as a couple, you've been working through the things that you and your husband have done. Kind of like the growth you're experiencing in the last 3 years, where things are just really starting to really pay off for all that work you've done to this point. You're healing. You're getting to a great place. I want to hear what would be your black belt sex tip. Things are good. Now you're ready to take things to the next level. What advice would you give a couple?
Okay, so you might appreciate this because you have a large family, but our absolute go-to, truly like lifesaver, is we take regular hotel dates.
Nice.
Weekly, actually, is our aim. We go to a hotel weekly, and we don't spend the night. We go for probably anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. And it has been amazing. We price line it. And so the same price that you would pay basically for dinner and a movie for a date night, we get a nice, long, uninterrupted shower. Nobody's banging on the bathroom door. Nobody's screaming. Nobody needs us. We get maybe a nap. We get some long time for sensual touch, for conversation. Maybe we need a big cry. Maybe we need to just process some pain. Whatever it is that real life is bringing up, we have space to do it. And then we get to make love for an extended amount of time. I think what I have noticed is that the biggest game changer for a profoundly meaningful sex life is margin. And whatever way you can create margin to have time to invest in learning each other's bodies, studying each other, time to unwind together from our busy, noisy, loud life that we all live, is gold. Quickies are amazing. Quickies keep us going. But those long sessions of uninterrupted, literally making love, making this love that we are giving away, making love that is overflowing into our children, into our workplaces, into our church communities. It comes from us leaning in and God pouring out the gift of pleasure and beauty to make love come from this marriage. And it's beautiful. But I will say hotel dates have been the key for us. We started doing it during COVID because all the restaurants were closed and we needed to get out of the house, and we just haven't stopped. And it's been absolutely wonderful. And I do have a podcast about it, but it has become so meaningful, not just like an exciting date out. It's been a lifeline for us. So yeah, Priceline though is the way to go, because then you can navigate the best deals around.
Especially if you live in a big metro area like you with lots of hotels. That would make sense.
And if you don't, maybe just kid swap, like have your kids leave for a while or figure out another way. But the idea is margin. That's the big idea.
I love that. What a great tip. Thank you. If people want to know more about you and what you do, what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I have a website. It's my name, franciewinslow.com. I have a podcast called Heaven in Your Home. We talk about sex, marriage, and the mission of God. I'm on social media. I do have a discipleship circle that I run for women, and we meet once a month online for a Zoom call, and it's a really rich time of being together and growing together. So those are some places.
Very good. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.